Welcome to our Introduction to Personality Theory course, and we continue researching and understanding and analyzing theories from so-called biological domain. In last videos, we discussed different genetical and physiological differences in people and how they can influence some psychological individual differences between people. In these videos, we will discuss so-called evolutionary psychology and this research perspective on personality psychology, which would be quite interesting. So in next two videos, we will discuss briefly Darwin's theory of evolution and a key concept, because it's a foundation for modern evolutionary theory and we need to understand those basic concepts. Then we will discuss what is inclusive fitness theory, is a modern evolutionary theory, what are the products of evolutionary process, and then what are premises of evolutionary psychology exactly. And after that, we can discuss several research results interesting for personality psychology. For example, what can be considered as a human nature, including need to belong, altruism, and universal emotions. What are possible sex differences and their impact on us from evolutionary psychology standpoint? What are individual differences and how they can be explained through evolutionary psychology? And finally, what are limitations to evolutionary psychology as any other research perspective and theory? It also has some limitations which we need to be aware of when analyzing complex phenomena in the domain of personality psychology. So let's start with Darwin's theory of evolution. So I quickly remind you that Charles Darwin is a famous British scientist, one of the most famous in the world, who introduced the theory of evolution. So Darwin proposed his theory. The main idea is that processes by which adaptations are created and change take place over time. This process is natural selection. So natural selection is one of the key concepts of Darwin's theory. The idea is that changes, or so-called variants, he used that concept, that better enabled an organism to survive and reproduce will lead to more descendants. Those descendants would inherit the variants that led to their ancestors' survival and reproduction. So this idea is quite simple. If we have some group of animals, and some animals are different from others, and they have some sort of advantage for survival and reproduction, they will highly likely to survive, while others will probably die. And if they survive, they have higher chances to have descendants. And those descendants would be genetically more similar to their parents, which is also quite obvious for us from 21st century perspective. So natural selection, though, works very slowly. So it's a gradual changes in species over time. It takes dozens and hundreds of thousands years for species to change, sometimes even millions of years. So it is incredibly slow process, but it works. So that's why species evolve, because some of the variants have an advantage. They survive better, they have more descendants, those descendants inherit those advantages, continue to have more descendants in future. One simple example is represented on the slide, which you can see. For example, if population of mice has moved into new area. In this new area, the rocks very dark. Because of normal natural genetic variation, some mice are dark black and some are having light fur. Because of that, some mice become more obvious victims, more obvious prey for predators, for example, eagles or other carnivorous birds. And thus, dark mice survive better, have more descendants, and after a certain period of time and couple of generations, black mice become dominant in the population of mice because it leads to better survival and reproduction. So it happens slowly, but all the time, unsuccessful variants decrease in frequency and vanish from the species, while successful variants come to characterize the entire species slowly. So if we will continue observation on this population of mice, in many, many generations, only black mice will survive, and this entire species would be a bit different. So this is a basic idea. But except natural selection, Darwin also introduced the concept of so-called sexual selection. So Darwin noticed that some species have redundant traits, traits that do not help to survive or even worsen the chances of survival. For example, a peacock's tail or stag's antlers. So they actually inconvenient, they decrease speed. It's harder to run from predators when you have a large tail or huge antlers. But some wise they still inherit that. So Darwin tried to explain it. He couldn't find any plausible explanation in terms of natural selection and came to the conclusion that it's a different mechanism, so-called sexual selection. So according to Darwin's theory, such traits evolved because they contributed to individuals' mating success, providing an advantage in competition for desirable mates. And indeed, for example, peacocks with larger and more extravagant tails have better chances for mating compared to peacocks with a smaller and less beautiful tails. The same is applicable for stags. If they have larger antlers, they have better chances to find a mate and reproduce. So the evolution of those characteristics, which are redundant, don't help survival, but increase chances of mating, is known as a sexual selection, right? Because to survive is only the part of your job as a species. You also need to reproduce, because if you won't reproduce, you won't pass your genes to future generations, and you will just vanish. So sexual selection is a bit more complicated than that because sexual selection basically has two different forms, so-called intrasexual selection and intersexual selection. So intersexual selection happens with members of the same biological sex. They compete, and outcome of their contest gives the winner greater sexual access to members of opposite sex. So often in many species, it's males competing and dueling each other, and the winner gets higher chances to find a female match. So direct competition between individuals of the same sex to maintain ability to pass their traits. Everything is simple. Example, male lions and control over the pride. So male lions fight with each other, losers go away, and dominant lion stays in the pride and fathers all the children in the pride. If dominant lion changes, the new lion often kills all other babies and starts from the scratch, so wants to pass only his genes to future generations. Intersexual selection works differently. So members of different sex choose each other, but based on some preferences of particular qualities. So it's kind of a competition to attract the mate. Some examples from nature: birds showiness of plumage or ability to build a good, beautiful nest, or bird song, right? So some male birds start to sing in attempt to attract a female match for mating. Right, so actually both forms of sexual selection also applicable to people, to a lesser extent, of course, because we have free will and ability to decide, do we want to have children. In people, sex is often separated from reproduction, right? And not all people start family, raising children, and so on, but still attracting people of other sex is important part of life for many people. And different forms of intersexual selection still happen in people as well. Even on different dating apps like Tinder or Bumble, people try to attract their match, showing different particular qualities. It would be an example of intersexual selection, so, but it still works. So for people, even with our advanced culture and different form of mind compared to other animal species. Inclusive fitness theory is a modern update for evolution theory proposed by Darwin. So in modern day biology, no one argues with Darwin, and his theory was proved by hundreds and thousands of findings, and it just became a commonplace for biology. But it contains only basic concepts like natural selection, sexual selection, adaptations, and so on. So inclusive fitness theory is a bit more modern addition to evolutionary theory. Some of its ideas were introduced by William Donald Hamilton. So there are two metrics of evolutionary success according to Dr. Hamilton. So the first one is so-called personal fitness. It's a number of offspring or children any individual has. It doesn't matter, do you raise your children, do you take care of them? It doesn't matter. It's just how many offspring you beget. Simple as that. Basically, more offspring you beget is better because it increases your chances to pass your genes to new generations, because not all offspring survives, unfortunately. So the nature is quite harsh and cruel, and more offspring you have, higher chances you have to pass your genes to next generation. It's called personal fitness. But there is also inclusive fitness metrics. So it's a number of offspring equivalents that you basically take care about, right? So you might have offspring and take care about them, increasing their chances for survival, or you can even take care of offspring of other individuals. And because you take care of them, it increases their chances for survival, which also might be a metric of evolutionary success. For example, you don't have your own children, but you take care of children of your siblings, brothers and sisters. They also have your genes because you're genetically related, obviously, and because you help to nurture them and you guard them and keep them safe and well-fed, it increases their chances of survival, and thus you don't pass your genes directly because they're related to you. You increase the chances of survival of your own genes through providing this care and nurturing. This is called inclusive fitness. So it's a bit different. It's an additional idea to what Darwin introduced, right? So inclusive fitness is kind of a combination of direct and indirect fitness, as you can see on the slide in this video. So when we think about usual direct, so-called direct fitness, we usually think about like just several generations of parents and their children passing genes directly. But in reality, there is also so-called indirect fitness because some of our relatives also help us to survive, find food and shelter, and so on, but they not always directly our parents, but they still genetically related to us to different forms of extent. So inclusive fitness can lead to adaptations that incline you to take some risks for the welfare of your genetic relatives, but not too great of a risk. Not too great because you probably want to survive yourself, and most of animals and people are not ready to sacrifice themselves and die for their relatives. So some people are more heroic than that. So inclusive fitness theory as an expansion of Darwin's theory also helps to explain the phenomenon of altruism and altruistic behavior. According to inclusive fitness theory, altruism is a basic example of inclusive fitness. So we help others, increasing their chances for survival, but it also has an evolutionary impact. So, and this provides an explanation what can be the evolutionary origin of altruistic behavior that many people have. So speaking about products of evolutionary process, so okay, we have natural selection, we have sexual selection. We know that we can have adaptations, but adaptations are not the only products of evolutionary process. So though it may be the most important one. So adaptation, what it is exactly, right? So it's a reliably developing structure in the organism, which, because it meshes with the recurrent structure of the world, causes the solution of an adaptive problem. So different animal species live in a certain environments, and they face different challenges, also called adaptive problems. For example, they need to protect themselves, they need to eat, they need to reproduce, right? On the picture, you can see different species with their adaptations. For example, long neck of giraffe help giraffes to find more sources of food, because with such a long neck, they can eat grass, but they also can eat leaves from high trees, which they were not capable before they developed the longer neck. So it's an adaptation. Longer neck provides them with a solution of finding food problem, right? Camouflage of zebra helps them to avoid predators and survive. So this is an adaptation which solves a problem of safety, right? So the same as, for example, shelled egg adaptation. So compared to eggs of a fish, which are soft and not protected, shelled eggs of birds provide their offspring with better protection during the period of their life when they develop as an embryo or inside shelled egg. And it's an adaptation. It helps to solve an adaptive problem of safety on offspring. It's the same for other species. The hallmark of adaptation is so-called special design. It's the features of an adaptation are recognized as components of specialized problem-solving machinery. And so in simple words, it's just how basically it solves an adaptive problem. So which parts of an adaptation helps to do that. So factors of adaptation are efficiency in solving a specific problem, precision, right? So sometimes species can develop something which is efficient, but do not work for all the situations they face equally, so the precision can be lower, and reliability, right? So does it work in all the situations, or this mechanism not always easy to apply, right? So the good adaptation would be, of course, efficient, precise, and reliable at the same time. And adaptations which do not meet all the criteria, not that great, and variants with those adaptations might have worse chances to survival. Then it means worse chances to have offspring and pass their genes, and they can be replaced with variants with better adaptations. This is quite straightforward, meets the basic ideas of the Charles Darwin's theory. So, but it's not only product of evolutionary process. We also have so-called byproducts of an adaptation. So human adaptation can be byproducts. It's applicable not only for human, but because it's course in psychology, we're probably more interested in people. So it's incidental effects that are not properly considered to be adaptations. So often they're just neutral. For example, a belly button in people, its result byproduct of an adaptation of how we basically have children and embryonic relationships, connection with placenta, and so on. So belly button basically completely neutral to survival. If you won't have any after you was born, nothing will change for you. So it cannot be considered as an adaptation. It doesn't solve any problems you might encounter in your environment. And finally, there is also an evolutionary noise. So it's completely random variations that are neutral with respect to selection. For example, bumps on your skull or voice pitch differences. All people have different voice pitch. Some people have lower voice, some people have higher voice. It doesn't affect anything, to be honest, right? So and thus it's like evolutionary noise, the same as bumps on your skull. Most of the time they're even hidden with your hair. No one sees them. All people have a bit different shape of the skull, a bit different bumps, completely irrelevant to your survival. Evolutionary noise, the third type of evolutionary product. So you need to be aware of all three, because if we start to think about psychological difference between people, and evolutionary psychology tries to apply evolutionary theory to psychology, obviously, some differences between people can be caused by adaptations, some by byproducts, and some by evolutionary noise. So not all of them are equally important in terms of like evolutionary analysis. So premises of evolutionary psychology. Adaptations are presumed to be domain-specific, in the sense that they are designed for evolutionary process to solve a particular adaptive problem. Right? So all species live in a certain domain, in a certain environment, and they're designed to solve specific adaptive problem. People are not exception. So evolutionary speaking, we emerged as a species in Africa 100 to 100,000 years ago. Homo sapiens species, one of the many Homo species who emerged before us. We have several adaptations, for example, so-called bipedia, walking on two legs, the same as several other Homo species. We have it freed our arms and hands, which led to ability to craft something and use hands for communication. We have a bit better voice and vocabulary system compared to other Homo species, which improved our communication skills and so on, right? So it's completely applicable for people as well. So nowadays we live in completely different environments. They're different from what we emerged in, right? So because people invented clothing and a lot of tools, and they started to live in other places and on other continents, and because of technological progress, we live in a completely different environment. But evolutionary speaking, we were designed to live in different conditions in Africa. So we're not designed, for example, to live in the northern countries such as Canada. We need a special tools to survive, like, for example, proper clothing to keep you warm. So evolutionary psychologists also suggest that human mind also contains a large number of mechanisms or psychological adaptations. So we can speak about adaptations not only in terms of your body, but also in terms of your mind. So evolutionary psychologists expect there be a large number of domain-specific psychological adaptations to correspond to a large number of distinct adaptive problems people have recurrently confronted. So some of our psychological mind differences and processes were designed to help us to adapt to an environment we emerged in as a species. And thus, if we want to understand how our mind works, we need to travel back in time and space and try to understand what specific adaptive problems our ancestors faced and why they developed certain mechanisms. That's the origin of our different mental functions, phenomena, and differences. And finally, functionality is the notion that our psychological mechanisms are designed to accomplish particular adaptive goals, so that most of our psychological mechanism serves some sort of a purpose to solve certain type of a problem. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that understanding adaptive functions is also critical to insight into our evolved psychological mechanisms. The search for function involves identifying the specific adaptive problem for which the mechanism is an evolved solution. So if we want to understand our psychological mechanisms, we need to understand those adaptive problems our ancestors have faced in the past. That's basically the premises of evolutionary psychology. In next video, we will continue discussing some research and its results, and how evolutionary psychologists actually think individual and sexual differences work. Thank you.